Hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown. If you eat, sleep, and breathe Maryland basketball, then this is the place for you. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and I'm excited to be back for another episode as we are on the eve of the Terps kicking off Big Ten play. That means basketball season is really, truly here. But before we jump into that, start looking ahead to the Ohio State game, start looking back a little bit at some of those big non-conference wins over the last week, a reminder that if you're listening to this show on an audio form on Apple, on Spotify, wherever, although on Spotify you get video too, but if you want to check this out in video form, you want to check it out on YouTube, then you got to go to youtube.com/@Department of Hoops, because this show is part of the Department of Hoops, a DMV media network. So check it out, hit that subscribe button. You can see this show in video form, and you can check out a lot of other great content covering the Wizards, covering Georgetown, GW, the whole local hoops scene. If you love local hoops, then the Department of Hoops is the place for you. So I'm really excited to be a part of that network. But let's dive right into this thing, and let's start by a quick look back over the last week at a couple of the games Maryland played. Two more blowouts, a 91-67 win over Bucknell the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and a 96-58 win over Alcorn State, a 38-point win the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Maryland won its fifth game by 30 or more points of the season. The last time that the Terps had that many 30-plus point wins was in 1998-1999 when the Terps won 5 of their first 7 games by 30-plus points. So I should say the last time they had this many 30-plus point wins this early in the season. Either way, it's been a fantastic start to Maryland. I don't want to dive too deep into these games because I feel like at this point we've said all you can say when you're playing competition like a Bucknell, like an Alcorn, like a lot of the teams Maryland has played so far this season. But one quick takeaway for me from those two games was that we're starting to see a little bit more from Selton Miguel. We're starting to see a bit of the Selton Miguel that we heard about all offseason long. We're starting to see the Selton Miguel that earned all these accolades in the AAC at South Florida a season ago. And in these two games, he put up 13 and 14 points respectively, and he did a lot of it from beyond the arc, going 3 of 5 against Bucknell and 4 of 7 against Alcorn State. So interested to see if there's a path for him to be a little bit more of a contributor as the season goes on. And don't look now, but Maryland is shooting as a team nearly 34% from beyond the arc, good for 146 in the country, which is a huge jump, a huge improvement from where they were a season ago. It was the main question I had when I did the preview show is, can they improve from beyond the arc? Because last year they finished 347th in the country. Well, they have a lot thus far, and if Selton Miguel can give them some of what he has the past couple of games, I think this could really be not only decent, but pretty good three-point shooting team, which is a huge difference from what they were last year. So that's one thing I'm really keeping an eye on that did catch my attention, that did draw my eye from those wins. But all in all, a couple good wins for the Terps as they continue to cruise over lesser competition. And in large part because of how they've cruised against lesser competition, Terps fans got a nice, wouldn't call it a surprise, but got a little bit of a gift earlier this week when the net rankings came out. The net rankings are one of the metrics that the selection committee has on their team sheet, and maybe even more importantly, it's what the selection committee uses to group teams into those quad 1, quad 2, quad 3, and quad 4 that you always hear them reference when they talk about why a team was seated where they were. Well, they performed well against quad 1 teams, which are the best teams, or they had quad 3 losses, something you don't want to take. You always hear them reference those quads when they talk about why a team was seated where they were, or why a team did or didn't make the tournament. And it was a little bit of a gift when those rankings came out earlier this week to see Maryland debut at number 23, now up to number 22. And again, in large part, that's because Maryland has taken care of business and, quite frankly, beat the brakes off these teams that are quad 4 teams. Maryland's 6-0 in quad 4 games. And of course, I mentioned all those 30-point wins. A big part of that net calculation, or I shouldn't say a part of the net calculation is net efficiency. And Maryland has been extraordinarily efficient. So you can schedule these games against lesser caliber competition. You just really got to beat them and beat them bad. And Maryland's done exactly that. So the Terps off to a really nice start in those net rankings. And it reminds me a lot of what Iowa State did last year, because Iowa State took a ton of flack early on last season for quote-unquote gaming the net. And Iowa State, I'm going to bring up their schedule right now. Iowa State did not play the strongest non-conference schedule early last season, but they were beating teams bad. Just like kind of going through some of their scores here, they beat a school called Lindenwood 102-47. Lindenwood was one of the worst teams in the country last year. They beat Green Bay 85-44, and they beat Grambling State 92-37. Those are the kind of results that Iowa State was putting up, very similar to what Maryland has done to start the season right now. And early on in those net rankings, Iowa State was very high, despite losing some non-conference games. They lost to Virginia Tech. They lost to Texas A&M. They did get a win over Iowa, but, it wasn't like they went out there and they had beaten some great teams over the course of the non-conference season. And so Iowa State caught a lot of flack for that, but it really helped them in their net rankings because they were beating the brakes off these teams. Now, Iowa State went out and finished second in the Big 12, which I think was the best conference in the country last year. They went out and then they won the Big 12 tournament, and that's why they got a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, but they got off to a very nice start. And now it's time for Maryland to turn the page too and see if they can use this nice start to build some momentum going into Big Ten play. If they can use this nice start in these net rankings, these confidence-building wins to say, hey, it's time for Big Ten play where we need to turn things up, and can we go be a contender in this league? And can we now build a resume and get some of those quality wins, the quad 1 wins, quad 2 wins that really matter when you're trying to earn a good seed in the NCAA tournament? Now it is time for that. And Maryland will get their first opportunity to do so on Wednesday night as they take on Ohio State, an Ohio State team that's 5-2 overall. They're number 18 in KenPom, and they are number 22 in the net rankings. I can't remember if I said it or not. Maryland did move up from 23 to 22. So it's going to be number 22 in the net versus number 12 in the net in this matchup. Neither of these teams ranked in the AP or the coaches poll, but according to the net rankings, a top 25 matchup, and according to KenPom, Ohio State's a top 25 team. Maryland's sitting just outside the top 25 at number 32. So this is a big opportunity for Maryland, and I view this set of games, and the Big Ten has done this the past couple of years where everybody plays these 2 December games, and Maryland will host Ohio State on Wednesday night, then they will go to Purdue on Sunday. I view these games very similarly to how I viewed the Marquette game. And I talked about that Marquette game as I was previewing it as this opportunity to not only build confidence among the team, but give the fan base an incentive to show up. Give the fan base hope. Give the fan base a reason to say, hey, I want to go to these games. I want to give Maryland this great home court advantage because we saw it against Marquette. And if you're listening to this podcast, you know that the Xfinity Center is an outstanding home court advantage when it is full. The trick is filling the place up because it doesn't always happen. And I think Maryland fans, and maybe with good reason, need a reason to show up because last year was not good. I think a lot of people were very skeptical about last year. Now, I think despite losing to Marquette, I think there's confidence probably isn't the right word, but I think there is hope. I think there is positive momentum. I think anybody who has watched Derek Queen play is extraordinarily excited. I mean, I can't get enough of watching Derek Queen play. And I think a national audience is going to see that very, very soon as Maryland starts playing some of these bigger games, starts getting into conference play. More people see what Derek Queen can do. I mean, every time he plays basketball, it is a treat. So I think a lot of people, despite the close loss to Marquette, have optimism about this team. I think a lot of people who went to that Marquette game were pretty happy with what they saw despite the loss. But the trick is, especially when you're playing the schedule like Maryland's playing, especially when you have two NFL teams in this area like the Ravens and like the Commanders that are most likely going to be in the NFL playoffs in this NFL crazy region of the country that College Park's located in. When you're playing a schedule where you're only playing a big game every couple of weeks, you got to make them count, and you got to give people a reason to remember that college basketball exists this time of year. And I think that's exactly what Maryland can do if they can at least split these two games against Ohio State and Purdue here. Because after the Purdue game on December 8th, Maryland has a long break due to finals. They don't play again until December 17th when they play St. Francis. Then on December 21st, which is also the opening round of the college football playoff, we're going to have 3 college football playoff games on that day. They play Syracuse. I'd imagine that game's going to get pretty lost in the shuffle there right before December. Not a very good Syracuse team, currently ranked 101 in KenPom. They're 4-2 on the season. And then after that, Maryland has a week off, plays Maryland Eastern Shore. That ends their non-conference slate. And then they go out to Washington to play their first Big Ten game of the new year. That game's going to be a late night game, 9:30 p.m. on Big Ten Network on January 2nd. So my point being, I think it can be very easy for people, not you, of course, listening, watching this show. You're a diehard. You wouldn't be listening to this otherwise. But I think it can be very easy for the casual fan to kind of remember that college basketball and Maryland basketball is a thing this time of year. And I think winning one of these two games gives people a reason to remember, gives people a reason to get excited, gives people a reason to say when Maryland comes home for a Friday night game on January 10th against UCLA, which will be Maryland's next big home game after this, because that Syracuse game is at a neutral site. I'm trying to remember where that one is. I think it's in Brooklyn. Yeah, it's in Brooklyn. They go on the road to play Washington and Oregon on January 2nd and 5th. Their next big home game, and it will be over a month from now, is against UCLA on a Friday night. A UCLA team that's off to a good, not great start. They're 6-1, but they are number 17 in KenPom. High expectations for Mick Cronin's squad this year. It will give people a reason to say, like, hey, I want to go to that game. Hey, Maryland's off to a really good start. You know, they beat Ohio State at home. I remember that game. That was fun. Hey, maybe they surprise and win at Purdue. They go 2-0 to start Big Ten play. It gives people a reason to get excited. And I think with how good that home court advantage can be for Maryland, it's really important to kind of maintain that momentum, continue building that momentum to get people excited about this college basketball season. Because I think once people show up, they see this team play, they watch Derek Queen play, it's hard not to get excited about this team. So that's kind of what these two games mean to me. Now, it's also an opportunity for Maryland to start building that resume. Like I mentioned, Ohio State, number 12 in the net. That's a quad one win. And those are going to be, that's the difference. Those quad one games are the difference between, okay, sometimes did you make the tournament or did you miss the tournament? And sometimes did you get a 7 seed or did you get a 4 seed? And to me, I always think, and I haven't had a chance to have a lot of these philosophical questions about, you know, success in college basketball and success for Maryland, and I'll definitely do a lot more of that as the season goes on and we move into the offseason. But the goal to me is always you want to make the tournament as much as you possibly can with a 1-4 seed. The tournament's fluky. Crazy things happen. Weird matchups happen. Bad matchups happen. You get a bad draw sometimes. Sometimes you get a great draw, but sometimes you get a bad draw. But if you continue to make the tournament with a 1-4 seed, a protected seed, where you are favored to make the Sweet 16, eventually you should break through. Eventually you should get to an Elite Eight, to a Final Four, if you year after year after year make the tournament with that type of seed. And that should be the goal to me here at Maryland. Consistently make the tournament, make it as many times as you can with a 1-4 seed, and have breakthrough years in the tournament. Because after all, that is what college basketball is all about. It's all about the madness. It's all about March. It's all about going on those magical, magical runs. So this could be the first step in Maryland building a really nice tournament resume. A really nice resume where not only do they have this high net ranking that they've built by beating the ever-living hell out of a bunch of these overmatched teams, but also a resume that includes wins over good teams, other tournament teams. And so far, it looks like Ohio State will likely be another tournament team. Now, it's a little early maybe to say that, but they are off to a good start, and it's a big game from that perspective, as well as continuing to build confidence for this team itself. It's not a team that I feel like is lacking in confidence. I kind of talked about that after the Villanova game, but still, you want to continue with a team that is still learning how to play with each other. You want to see them find ways to be successful and build that confidence. So that's what these kind of two early Big Ten games mean to me. Now let's start previewing this Ohio State game. So Ohio State, as I said, they're 5-2, and their two losses were at Texas A&M and then a home loss against Pitt on this past Friday. They lose on a buzzer beater in overtime. And for Ohio State fans, certainly not the worst loss of the weekend. If you saw what happened with their football team on Saturday, dropping another game to Michigan, you know that's kind of overshadowing everything in Columbus right now. But still, not a great one for the basketball Buckeyes on Friday night. A real heartbreaker there against a Pitt team that is pretty good. Now, this Ohio State team also has a win over Texas. They opened the season with a win over the Longhorns in Vegas, and they're off to a decent start here. Jake Diebler is their coach. He's in his first full season as the head man. He took over for Chris Holtmann on an interim basis last season. They ended the regular season 5-1, including a win over Purdue. He got them playing really well, and that Purdue win was in his first game as the interim head coach. So a really nice end of the season for Jake Diebler, and it was enough to land him the full-time job. So, I kind of view Chris Holtmann. Chris Holtmann, to me, was kind of similar to a Mark Turgeon situation at Ohio State, where he was there from 2018 through, part way, almost all the way through 2024, and he was good, but never great. They never made it to a Sweet 16, and it was enough for Ohio State. They'd had a couple disappointing seasons. In 2023, they went 5-15 in the conference, never acceptable at Ohio State. But to me, the Chris Holtmann era at Ohio State was very reminiscent to the Mark Turgeon era at Maryland, where he had some really good teams. They were competitive in the Big Ten. They earned some good seeds in the tournament, but it wasn't good enough in March, and it just felt like a team that was never playing its best basketball at the end of the season. So Jake Diebler now takes over as the full-time head coach. And when I look at this Ohio State team, I see a very balanced team. They have 5 players averaging double figures, and they're led by Bruce Thornton, who's leading the way for them with just over 16 points a game, 6 assists per game as well. He's a guy who was preseason All Big Ten, and he's a guy, if you've been watching Big Ten basketball, you're probably familiar with his name because he has been around this Ohio State program for a while. He's a junior, and he's been a guy that's been a big part of their team their past couple of years. So what am I looking at when I look at this game? My first question is, will Ohio State stay hot from beyond the arc, or can Maryland cool them down? Because I talked about how this team has a bunch of players averaging double figures. Well, they also have a bunch of players who are very, very good three-point shooters. They have 4 guys, Bruce Thornton, Michi Johnson, Micah Parrish, and John Mobley, who are averaging at least 4 three-point attempts per game. And all 4 of those guys are also shooting better than 40% from beyond the arc. Thornton shooting 53.6%. Johnson just under 42%. Parrish just under 41.4%. And John Mobley 57%, 56.8%, a scorching hot rate from beyond the arc. So not only do they have guys that can score, they have guys that can shoot it from beyond the arc. They are second nationally as a team from beyond the three-point line this year. And we've seen it in the past with Maryland in this Kevin Willard era. They can't trade 2s for 3s. It's bad math. And Maryland has not been a good three-point shooting team historically. There's an Ohio State team that really wants to shoot the 3-ball, that's very good at shooting the 3-ball. So can Maryland cool them down? I had the opinion coming into this season that Maryland could be elite defensively, given everything we've seen from Kevin Willard over his tenure here and at Seton Hall, given some of the length and athleticism they have on this team. But after going up against Villanova and going up against Marquette and allowing some really quite frankly, big scoring outbursts from their top players in Cam Jones and then Eric Dixon for Villanova, including Dixon going 5 of 11 from beyond the arc in that game, I'm a little skeptical, and I want to see Maryland shut this Ohio State team down, and shutting down the three-point line is going to be a big part of that. If Maryland can't hold them down from beyond the arc, I imagine it's going to be Maryland. There's only two ways to win. Maryland will have to match them from beyond the arc because you can't trade twos for threes, or Maryland will have to shut them down defensively from beyond the three-point line. Those are the only two options for the Terps if they want to win that game. They need to shoot effectively from three themselves, or they need to make sure Ohio State doesn't shoot 40-some% from three. They're shooting 44.8% as a team this year. That is too much. They cannot let that happen. So that's the first big question for me when I think about this game, when I think about this Ohio State team, when I think about the challenges that they present. Now, number two is when Ohio State goes small, who will have the advantage? Because Ohio State is a team that will often play a lineup that features three guys that are 6'6" in Parrish, Evan Mahaffey, the transfer from Penn State, and Devin Royal, but nobody taller than that. All three of those guys 6'6", and they don't play anybody taller than that. Now, they do have a guy on this team, 7-footer Aaron Bradshaw. He's a Kentucky transfer, and he has not participated in the past 3 games. He's a DNP the last 3 games. The Columbus Dispatch reported that he's not participating in team activities while the university investigates a possible domestic incident at his off-campus apartment. Before the Pitt game, Diebler said currently there's no update on Aaron Bradshaw, so I would not expect to see him in this game. And he was a guy who was their best rim protector. He was playing a lot. He was starting for them before these last 3 games, and he was averaging almost 2 blocks per game. So they don't have a big rim protector in there. You would think that when Ohio State goes small, Maryland could have the advantage. When you have a guy like Derek Queen, when you have a guy like Julian Reese, you would think on the offensive end for Maryland, they should be able to take advantage of that. They should be getting the ball in the post every time down the court and really making them pay for not having anybody taller than 6'6" in the lineup. That's what you would think. That's what you would hope. But the question is on the other side of the ball. Are those guys, is Derek Queen, is Julian Reese going to be quick enough to defend a 6'6" guy out on the perimeter? Now, it's not like Villanova where Eric Dixon, who is a little bigger, he's 6'8", and he's strong as can be, don't get me wrong there, but he is a guy who is a big guy, but a face-up big who can shoot it from the outside. Mahaffey and Royal really aren't those guys. It's more their guards. Parrish is a little bit more of that. Obviously, he's one of those guys that's shooting better than 40%. So it's not like Queen and Reese are going to have to be really worried about that pick and pop with Mahaffey and Royal, but it's those other 3 guys that can shoot it. It's also the quickness of those guys, too. That's what you worry about when you think about Ohio State going small. Maryland should have the advantage of the offensive end, but how do they handle it from a defensive perspective? And then how does Kevin Willard manage that lineup? You know, we've seen that Jordan Geronimo has not been available for the past few games. He's been dealing with a hamstring injury. He's missed the past 4 games. And this feels like a game where you'd love to have somebody with the length of and athleticism and experience in the Big Ten of Jordan Geronimo, especially on the defensive side of the ball. That's where I get a little concerned, and I don't expect to see him play in this game, but I would love to see him play in this game. So that's a really big question for me. Who has the advantage when Ohio State goes small? Does Ohio State take advantage of the offensive end, and does Maryland take advantage of the offensive end? How does Kevin Willard distribute the minutes between Julian Reese and Derek Queen? Does he play them both at the same time and say, hey, guard us? Yeah, guard us with your 6'6", your 2 6'6" guys in there. Or does he, make them play a guy like a Sean Stewart, who's a little bit bigger for Ohio State? That's the key to me in this one, is who's going to have that advantage when Ohio State goes small. How does Willard match up with them? Does he decide to try to match them at times, maybe only put one of Reese or Queen on the court? Or does he just say, hey, we're going to play our style of basketball, we're going to go big, and we dare you to stop us? I'm not sure the right answer, and I'm not sure if there's going to be one right answer all the time. I think you're going to have to see how the game plays out, but I would expect very big nights for Queen and Reese if they can get them the ball inside, because I just don't see anybody on this Ohio State roster who can really stop them. My final question about this game, when I look at it, when I think about what I've seen from Maryland, when I think about what I've seen from Ohio State, is can Jacoby Gillespie really thrive in pick and roll situations? Because going back and watching that Pitt-Ohio State game, the one Pitt beat them in overtime just a few days ago, one of Pitt's guards, Jalen Lowe, he had a great game. He had a fantastic game against him, and I was really impressed by him. He was a very creative finisher. I was impressed by that, and he goes off in that game for 28 points, including getting to the line 11 times in that game. And when I watched it, I saw that Ohio State was really struggling to defend him in pick and roll situations. He's a little bit of a bigger guard than Gillespie, but he seems similar in his quickness to Gillespie. So when I watched that game, I started thinking, how will Jacoby Gillespie do in this situation? Is this a situation Gillespie can take advantage of? Also, looking back at the game they played against A&M, the game they lost to Texas A&M, A&M shot 40 free throws in that game. Now, that's a signature of a Buzz Williams coach team. They always get to the free throw line. In fact, if I look at their free throw rate, let's see here, free throw rate, they're 30th in the country in free throw rate. And they have some guys who are excellent at getting to the line. But they had a couple guards. Wade Taylor goes to the line 7 times. They have another guy go to the line 12 times. A third guard goes to the line 9 times in that game. It seems like Ohio State can be gotten going to the basket, especially by quicker guards, especially by guards who are willing to get ahead of steam, get downhill, and get into the lane. And without a rim protector in there, I think that could be a really big asset for Maryland. So I see this as a game where Jacoby Gillespie can thrive getting to the rim and taking advantage of, if they switch a guy like Evan Mahaffey onto him, I think he could really thrive in that situation, or Devin Royal, if they switch one of those guys onto him, I think he can thrive. And then I think about Deshaun Harris-Smith, who, hasn't had the biggest offensive outputs this season. But I still see flashes. I still see moments with him. And he's a guy who did score 10 points against Alcorn State. That is his season high. I could see this as a game where if he is in while Gillespie isn't, if he's running point guard, that he can get downhill utilizing some of those pick and rolls, some of those dribble handoffs a little bit. Saw a little bit of that in the Pitt game as well for Jalen Lowe, where he was very successful with that. I could see Deshaun Harris-Smith thriving in that regard as well. So if Maryland can take advantage of that, I think they should be in very good shape in this one. It's going to be an interesting one to watch. I mean, I would give Maryland the advantage with the home court advantage. Ken Pom has them as a 2-point favorite right now. But those are the 3 keys to me in this game. What's the 3-point situation look like? Will Ohio State stay hot from beyond the arc? Can Maryland cool them off, or will they need to match them? When Ohio State goes small, will Maryland or Ohio State have the advantage? And can Jacoby Gillespie and Maryland's guards take advantage of Ohio State in pick and roll situations and get to the free throw line? Really looking forward to this one, and I really appreciate you hanging out with me today as we look ahead to Big Ten play. There is going to be so much more coming the rest of the season as college hoops is really now starting to heat up. Until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.